disgusted Noella, angry Heather, loud Shannon, combative Emily, fed up Gina, just there Jen, and confused Andy. Just typical reunion things for part 1 of season 16 Real Housewives of Orange County reunion. We are breaking down all the reunion things, including some former OC Housewives reactions to the season end and this first part of the reunion, because they have some very unique insight into what goes on with the cast, both on and off camera, production wise. So make sure to stay tuned until later to find out more and throughout the episode. I will give some updates also later on my end of season thoughts that I promised last time I would give you as part of this reunion recap. So thank you so much for being here and for chatting with me in the YouTube live chat for the premiere of this episode, or for just joining and joining the conversation wherever you are tuning in from. But with that said, let's get right into this episode 18 recap. So we start with the typical scene. Everyone arrive pre-glam to the soundstage somewhere in Los Angeles or the Orange County area, which I get why they do it this way, to have this little intro, even though some people I think don't like it, because it kind of breaks the fourth wall and makes them seem a little more relatable before the glow up. But at least this time, with a 2-part reunion, unlike last Beverly Hills season's 4 parts, we don't have much time to waste, so they are making sure to do the usual recent trend of splicing dramatic clips from the reunion we are about to see into this intro. But of course, they had to get in a clip of Heather trying to be relatable, making a joke about how the candy she brought on this day is not edible marijuana infused, unlike her likely product placement from earlier this season. We then get a brief acknowledgement of Shannon having to find a new reunion dress last minute, which was a headline in recent weeks because the dress she was supposed to wear was designed by a Project Runway designer, and for whatever reason it didn't work out as intended. I will link Dana Wilkie's OC pre-reunion live stream with another Housewife World Universe person, where they did a live stream going through the fashions of everything, which you can check out after we wrap up here. I'll link it down below. But in typical Shannon fashion, she called the wrong person to help her out. More on that fashion, like I said, later, and in other recaps that I'll link later on. But Noella seemingly was in a good mood as she arrived to get ready to pop her reunion cherry, as she says. And of course, that comment is right on brand for Noella this season with all the sex talk she had. But just further proves my point from the finale, which was just last week, of Noella kidding herself, saying that she is not going to have sex or be in a relationship for the time being. We will revisit that topic a little bit later during her segment update. But we then see Jen worried about her underwear situation, showing through her yellow dress we see here. And finally, Emily tending to a bloody nose after getting all made up, and as she was about to head to set to start filming. No sign of Gina, surprisingly, arriving to the set or in a trailer getting ready, or even walking up to the couch. So I guess she just kind of teleported to the couch. And the first sign of her, and maybe she's a hologram or I don't know, but the first sign of her was right before they started filming. She's on the couch getting her hair touched up by a hair stylist, designer, dresser, whatever. So who knows how she got to the couch? I don't know what that means for her, unless the footage of her doing all that stuff just wasn't that important or interesting to the storyline that they're trying to tell, or she just arrived already put together and just sat down. Who knows? But anyways, Andy is now going through greeting all the ladies, starting with Heather, because this was supposed to be her grand return, emphasis on supposed to be, after 5 seasons off. We get another montage of Heather showing off her house, which we already saw in episode 1 of the season. Heather says that this is also her 10-year anniversary of joining the show the first time. And Andy says, well, you look the same. And it appears from editing that Shannon is giving her kind of dismissive smirk to this Andy-Heather kiss-ass session, because to me, this was a very fake kiss-ass worthy interaction that I was like, are we really going to start off with just kissing Heather's behind? Maybe this was a setup or for her later taking the hot seat. Who knows at this point, but I don't agree with Andy saying that Heather looks the same as before. Sure, she's aging well compared to a lot of the population her same age, but when she's not all made up and not in great lighting like the reunion set or in her confessionals or in filters and edited images on Instagram or wherever she posts online, she looks different and not in a good way compared to her former self or first run on the show. I think her face personally looks unnaturally injected and puffy. Again, it's her face, her body, her life, so go for it. But that is just my observation and opinion, which clearly contrasts Andy's. But anyways, Gina is next with Andy pointing out the never-ending Gina's hair journey saga, and that's all she gets as far as her greeting goes. Emily is next, greeted with a congrats on her 13th wedding anniversary to Shane. Shannon is then offered a microdose to calm her reunion self down by Andy if her quote-unquote dealer, Heather, doesn't have what she needs in stock, which was very on brand of a comment for Andy. Then to the new girls, first Jen clarifying to the audience, who I guess they're making sure if someone missed out on Watch What Happens Live with her on there, where she already said this, but she clarifies again that she put her house on the market that we saw on the show for reportedly $5.9 million to hopefully move back to her hometown of Laguna Beach, where she grew up, and is asked jokingly by Andy if Ryan will be moving with her, and she says time will tell. Andy wants to take it as a joke, but her couch mates, Heather and Gina, are like, no, that's not really a joke, which after watching this season, I think Heather and Gina are interpreting that comment way more accurately than Andy for some reason. This is our first sign supporting the theory that Andy doesn't even watch the same show as all of us, or at least he plays stupid at the reunion to get some girls to open up a little bit more. But finally, we get to Noella saying she's excited, overwhelmed, and underprepared for this reunion, leading to Andy taking the chance to acknowledge the stack of vaginas shtick from this season from Noella by saying to her he hopes that she brought a stack of receipts, not a stack of vaginas. She says, yes, I brought the latter, meaning one over the other. I cannot help but point out how a ladder is also the thing they asked her if James used to reach all the vaginas to have sex with all of them. And this whole thing will come up again later. But anyways, before they get into the season discussion, Andy acknowledges that the set looks a little different this season, which has these artist interpretations of what he calls kind of iconic Orange County landmarks. And last time I said I was going to give my thoughts on the set as seen from the trailer last week. And now I'm thinking, you know what? It's a pretty cool idea. And everyone was kind of confused when they were just seeing the trailer and just the background of the girls' outfits that got out there that they released as far as who was wearing what. And I think a lot of people are changing their tune on this now because, one, it is an OC related theme, and the color scheme of the backdrop correlates to the finale party with Shannon's rack and roll party, which the lighting was very similar to that as far as the aesthetic of the party. But I want to now give you some more realistic insight into these iconic, what are called iconic landmarks of OC, as a native Orange County person who grew up very close to where the show filmed mostly in the early seasons. So first, the reason they used Tammy Knickerbocker's gates of her old home before her divorce was, and she was a cast member, by the way, in seasons 2 and 3, are because the actual gates of Coto de Casa are basically a parking structure or parking lot pay attendant gate arm thing with, I think they used to be the yellow like foam part on the bottom of the arm that could drop down and clamp on your car. As you see here, it looks a little more modern today. But if you want to see a really nice guard gate, go to Coto de Casa's community neighbor, Dove Canyon, for a cooler, more fancy looking gate, if you will, seen here. Now let's get to that actual Orange County sign that they show on the set, which they referenced in the finale with a shot from this angle that you see here pretty much. They probably pulled over to the side of this ramp here and got a lot closer, but it is represented on the stage, shown as if it's some landmark people stopped to take pictures with. But in reality, it is a non-accessible by foot sign structure at the Orange County, LA County line in Buena Park on the shoulder of Interstate 5 southbound. Unlike the Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas sign, which is a place people often are able to walk up to and take a picture with as a tourist in Las Vegas, this sign is in between the freeway and an off-ramp up on the top of a main line level where the off-ramp and the pedestrian crossing are a freeway underpass. So I would venture to say that the Orange County sign on this reunion set is probably actually larger than the real one that it's modeled after. But also this Orange County sign to me represents kind of the sensationalism of television, because I think there is only a monument like this out there because Orange County as a place referenced was made popular by shows like Real Housewives of Orange County and the OC and Laguna Beach, instead of just naming a city in Orange County that you're from. And also I think it's kind of a way to distinguish Orange County from LA, because there's kind of this rivalry, even though they kind of bleed together, as you see here. You would never, when you're driving from Orange County to Los Angeles, you don't really notice, besides maybe the roads change a little bit when you're crossing the county line. I like to say in person the city I'm from first when saying where I'm from, and then if they don't know that city, then I go, okay, a city nearby that they might know. And then if not, worst case scenario, I will say I'm from Orange County, but I personally cringe when people just default to that, because it's like, what does that even mean? There's a couple million people that live in Orange County. It's not like this small town, if you will, like not this rural county with one town in it. So anyways, they also have the Newport Coast archways, which in reality, as you see here, there's actually two of them, one on each corner of the entry to Newport Coast community, if you will. And it's one of those other things that you kind of just pass by and you wouldn't think they're anything special, but just kind of an entry to this community and kind of ornaments to complement the landscaping. But at least this makes a little more sense because, one, it's more accessible by footing. So if you found a place to park off of Pacific Coast Highway or whatnot and walk to this, you could take a picture near it. But also, this is where Heather lives, so that makes a little more sense. But to me, they're kind of trying to make these monuments and landmarks out to be more than they are. As far as the lifeguard stand, they are iconic Southern California things, but there is one like every couple hundred feet, especially in like Huntington Beach, which is a very long, flat beach. So anyways, I do think though the Ferrari was a bit unnecessary, but then again, they are trying to hold on for dear life to the painting of Orange County as this like all wealth place and only wealthy people live, which newsflash, it is not that way at all, as someone who grew up as a part of a middle-class family. So anyways, just some things that irk me as a native Orange County person when I watch the show. But I will say the set does look pretty cool, and the neon theme does look better than I thought it would, and complements their outfits better than I thought it would now that we see the whole picture. And even though they weren't all matching their outfits, it goes back to my thoughts last time in my kind of overall season thoughts after the finale, which was I felt like the season was going back to the original days of the show. And this no theme of outfits at the reunion is part of that, because early days of reunions, especially before there was other cities besides Orange County, they were not like what reunions are now in a lot of different ways. But anyways, let's finally get into discussing the season's storylines, topics, conflicts, resolutions, hardships, all the things. So we start with the return of Heather to the season with a recap of the highlights from this season, including mostly her kids. Heather is already getting emotional watching the clips package. Then we get a viewer write in about her kids showing a different side of Heather and the value of showing a modern coming out story with child and parent. Of course, this leads to Andy opening up about his coming out experience, being his mom basically mourning the loss of the life she thought he would have, or that she maybe wouldn't have grandchildren. Of course, we know now Andy has a son named Ben. He kind of makes an appearance via FaceTime later in the episode, which is really cute. And Heather then goes on to say that she didn't really have that thought in a modern coming out situation, because we as a society are one at a place where everyone can basically have a child that is biologically theirs in part with their partner, and even straight people and everyone else can't or don't have children and or even get married. So it just led to Andy bringing in Noella, and how Noella coming out very openly about being bisexual was the first bond between her and Heather when they first met. But Heather then shares more about how much work it took for her and Terry to get to a good place in their marriage after their worst year was caught on film during her original run on the show, which we were all witness to. All I will say in reaction to this first part was, I am surprised that they didn't mention their show, Terry and Heather's show on E called 7 Year Stitch. But maybe they finally got word of the viewers, like me, being annoyed by Heather's constant promotion and product placement. Noella is then introduced with quite the interesting ode to her many shocking storylines and a clips package, including us seeing her praise her now ex Sweet James as sweet, but her facial reaction, as you see here on the reunion set, shows how sour it has actually become since filming took place last summer. Now, Andy then starts digging for more of this juicy love story between Noella and James, where Noella says she and James met online, which is what we heard before, via those seeking arrangements, which was a new detail to this story, which she calls a more naughty site than other dating sites that she calls SA for short. Seeking arrangements, SA, not sexual assault, which is often what SA is abbreviated to here on YouTube when someone wants to talk about sexual assault but is afraid to get demonetized by YouTube. So just wanted to clarify that if anyone was watching confused. Andy then asks again, isn't that a sugar daddy website? And all the girls are kind of like, are you trying to say that that's just normal? And she says, yes, that is the standard. Beautiful women meeting wealthy men. So I went back to compare what Noella told us at the beginning of the season regarding how she met her husband, or now ex-husband, versus what she's telling us at the reunion. And it does check out that she's being consistent. But before, she basically just left it at we met online, not which means or which site she actually found him on. Former OC housewife Kelly Dodd said on her recap with her husband, Rick Leventhal, I'll touch on them a little bit throughout the episode and then more on the end, at the end regarding some things they've said. But Kelly says Noella meeting James could be, there's some rumblings, a modern day Pretty Woman Julia Roberts situation, and that there may be more to the story of her marriage and how they met and what went on that we haven't had any confirmation of rumors yet to really share. But they pointed out how, or Kelly and Rick pointed out how carefully Andy was navigating this topic, because potentially this is a huge bombshell and more to come out in the future. So he's tiptoeing around it for now, hoping that more will kind of be unveiled. So then we get more clarity on the legal marriage timeline versus the ceremony, because he was still legally married, James, at the time, which does add up. Noella says that the piece of paper wasn't important to her, which is contrasting what others have said about her only marrying him for the money. Basically, everyone on set, including Andy, are quick to call her out, saying, hold on, you met him on seeking arrangements, so clearly money was an aspect under consideration. And Noella is sticking to her story of going on the site to find a man that wanted a beautiful girl, and money wasn't on her mind when wanting to start a family and love James. Now, we learned that Gina and Noella's cryotherapy emotional session we saw earlier in the season actually was the same day that he served her, basically later that day. Whereas on the show, it looked like 2 different days to us, because we saw, I believe probably the next day or later that day, Noella FaceTiming Shannon telling her what went on. We then have Andy bringing up what James said online about Noella not being blindsided by the divorce like she claimed on the show, because he claims she was going to file separate first. And the reason he went so quick to file in Puerto Rico was to set the jurisdiction there before she had a chance to file. Now, Noella is calling that narrative a lie, and Noella says once she found out about the tax lien on, or the lien on the property, that she didn't know she was on there, which she was legally obligated to be told that by him, which he didn't do. And then all the tax debt surface and whatnot. That's when everything seemed to have changed, because she was wondering, why isn't he having these conversations with her in person, which was similar to what she said at the cryotherapy session, where she's like, is everything a lie? Why is he being so weird about this? She says he was ecstatic at first to the news she was going to be on the show, while on social media, her ex is claiming her going all in on the show was the demise of their marriage. But Noella is adamant if he had come to her with concerns about being on the show, she would not have joined, because she loved her family and husband and her child having a father in their life. Now, most of the cast is saying, I don't believe that. So then we get what I would say is the closest thing to really breaking the fourth wall regarding casting of the show being talked about on the show, where Noella says James was doing as much as he could to give her the best shot at being on the show to have this opportunity. Over many years, I guess they were courting her to potentially join the show, which was confirmed by Andy. He said he would even charter the chopper, as far as the helicopter, and he would make sure that it was known to the potential decision makers, basically posting it all on Instagram and whatnot. Emily then says she thinks everything changed as far as Noella on the show and James's support of her on the show when the tax things came out, because it made his business look bad. But Emily thinks Noella basically chose the show and fame over James because she didn't want to continue her life with him with all these issues surfacing if the other path was to separate and be on this show. Shannon then jumps in to defend Noella against everyone else, basically trying to tell Noella what she's thinking. After Noella then calls Emily creepy for her speculation, she again declares she was very much committed to James and their marriage. Although Noella did have to preface her saying all this with, I'm being authentic and wholehearted, which is to me a red flag that she may not be acting that way, but I understand why she is emphasizing that in this case. I am glad, though, to see Noella admitting, yes, I wanted to be on this show because it is a great opportunity and a great platform when asked. But I also agree with Emily's speculation about things changing once the skeletons started coming out of their closet, whether Noella knew about those things ahead of time or not, or they just happened to coincide with the show's filming. I don't think most girls or even the cast are judging Noella for how she met James. I think they're just more confused by her saying she met him on Seeking Arrangements, confirming that it's really basically sugar daddy website, but then saying she married him for love and not money. So that's the part that's kind of like, eh. Finally, she adds that James saw their child a few days after she appeared on Watch What Happens Live the week before they filmed this reunion, which was arranged by their lawyers. We then get clarity on the whole Puerto Rico house confusion, where Noella says they bought the house to escape the pandemic closures in Orange County. She clarifies to Emily just because they bought a vacation house doesn't mean they live there now, which Shannon backed her up on that, even though Emily points out a Noella post on Instagram about moving to Puerto Rico. Maybe she's saying they were considering it, who knows. But Noella then rebuts all that, saying, we have everything here in California: driver's license, voter registration, home, marriage. What's the issue? But Jen then speaks up for basically the first time this reunion, asking for confirmation if it's true that they do go back and forth from California to Puerto Rico every 10 days for a vacation. And Noella says yes. So maybe that was enough time, or they were wanting to live a lot of time in Puerto Rico, but they were going back and forth enough to where they could still claim residency in California. Who knows? But to wrap this segment up, Noella says she is officially divorced, but California will decide the custody agreement. Noella then shares about her new younger boyfriend who gifted her a sex toy company for Christmas after only a few weeks of dating in late 2021. So long for that I don't need sex or relationships comment at the end of the finale last week. And that was only in I'll touch on this later, the timing of that, but it was in late October 2021. She says she got the gift after a few weeks of dating for Christmas. So that means her whole no sex or relationship lasted at most 2 months. Proving my point last week of that being probably the least self-aware thing Noella said all season. And I didn't have to wait long to be proven right, so I'm pretty happy about that. Noella concludes by saying her new boyfriend wants to be monogamous in every way, so her stack of vagina days are over, where we then again get more clarity on the stack of vaginas thing, of it being a present for her to be pleasured by the two other girls, not a present for James to have sex with all three of them. Okay, that is enough, Noella, for now. Let's get into Shannon versus everyone. That topic this season, starting with the Nobu sushi party, where we start a little bit light with Heather clarifying that the $30,000 of wasted sushi was actually sent home with everyone as basically doggy bags who attended, after Noella and Jen stayed longer than the rest of the cast. Now, this confirmed my suspicion and observation from the first two episodes where that party was shown, of not only Terry and Heather exaggerating the waste of the party, but also the dramatic ending of the party was way over dramatized, when it only really ended for those cast members on camera, not for the people who were actually in attendance at the party. So basically the end of the party line was actually the filming part. I will add a notch on my belt for figuring that out and not being fooled. And this also explains why Heather was not mic'd up or being filmed in HD when she was talking to the catering staff in her kitchen at the end of the night, saying, "Oh, you guys can go home. We won't be using all this," or whatever. So clearly that whole thing was played up for the cameras and for the show. Shannon is then pressed on bringing up the lawsuit between Nicole, James, and Terry, where Shannon is adamant on not wanting to bring it up on the show. And the reason it came up was because she was unsure if it was the same girl she remembered being this platinum blonde back in the day versus the current brunette that she is. And she blames Gina for bringing it up on camera when she asked Heather at Javier's, or she asked Shannon at Javier's when Heather went to the bathroom, "Are you going to bring it up?" Where Gina says she was just trying to help Shannon do the right thing. Shannon said she assumed it had all been worked out between Heather and Nicole because the lawsuit was years ago, and Nicole and Heather had supposedly been friends for 8 years at the beginning of filming this season, which Kelly Dodd and some others have exposed that probably wasn't the case. But Shannon is still very defensive about the accusations that she brought it up off camera for Gina and Emily to do her dirty work by bringing it up on camera instead of her. Or if it hadn't been brought up on camera, that Shannon was going to save it for later in case she needed some ammo against some other girls. Emily makes a great point, saying you can't tell two people on the show something at the beginning of the season and expect it not to come out on the show. And Andy backs up that claim too. But then Heather has to bring it back to herself again, saying, "Let's get to the core of why I'm upset." She says basically, "You had plenty of opportunity to tell me, but you didn't. I would have just shrugged it off." Heather then breaks another fourth wall of saying, "You broke the code of not going after kids or careers on the show. This isn't some side hustle of mine making trucker hats." Not sure who she was shading on that one, or if she was trying to sound relatable but also successful, like the tequila comment that she said to Noella earlier in the season at Cabo, or in Cabo, that I thought came off really bad and probably not what Heather was intending. I have a short video on that if you want to check it out on the channel about the Cabo trip night one dinner. But the reason I don't believe Heather would not have shrugged it off if Shannon had brought it to her first is because the next sentence out of Heather's mouth in this reunion is, "Are you out of your mind for bringing up a lawsuit that could have been damaging to my husband's career? This is our bread and butter." And then Heather says she felt betrayed because she stayed in touch over the years with Shannon and thought they were on good terms, which also contradicts her comments in the finale last episode of saying she was happy to have reconnected with Shannon after all these years. So which is true. We then get a rehashing of the Emily and Gina reaching out to Heather right away to make things better before Shannon did. And then we get clarity on why Heather was so hesitant to make up with Shannon quickly on this one. And it was because Heather thought Shannon wouldn't do this after Heather many years ago, quote unquote, protected Shannon's family by not exposing the affair David was having, that Heather now claims everyone, including Shannon, knew, basically calling Shannon a liar because Shannon's narrative for a while was she was blindsided by the affair. And Shannon, of course, reacts with an, "That is unfucking believable. How dare you?" The same tone and inflection she always has. And also an, "Oh, thank you for not telling. Thanks. Very nice of you." Similar to how Heather kind of said that, "Oh, you're such a good friend," to Noella and Aspen about the whole shoving incident, and Noella giving her a chance to kind of not talk about it anymore. But anyways, Heather then continues to call Shannon out for putting on a front at the reunion that season when behind closed doors, they were dealing with the aftermath of the affair that would then come out next season during filming and then the whole thing. Heather then says her threat / promise came off as mob boss like because it was about her family, but Shannon calls her out saying, "I guess that doesn't apply to other people's families." And Shannon said she thought Heather was going to sue her from that threat promise that was pretty vague. And since Shannon has 3 kids full time, it was a threat to her kids. Heather then puts on her best waterworks, trying to say she would never sue Shannon. And I don't believe Heather would not sue Shannon. I think Heather made a very vague statement on purpose, similar to her karma statement to Noella and Aspen, to put fear of the worst case scenario, not only in Shannon, but also in the rest of the cast for the rest of filming, since this whole thing happened very early in filming. And I think Heather knows this could have and still can in the future open up Pandora's box of skeletons for her and Terry. And now she can call them all crazy for thinking that she would ever do something like that, like sue them in hindsight. Whereas if the threat and promise that she made to Shannon didn't work and people kept coming after her, I have no doubt that she would continue escalating the retaliation, if you will, in my opinion. And once I watched Rick and Kelly's recap, where Kelly said she received multiple cease and desist from Heather recently, I think I am right in that opinion. So Emily then gets the spotlight explaining her tequila Emily side while also saying she took on the truth teller role this season, but wasn't always clear on her message, leading to a lot of confusion. Now, on the Mormon religion storyline, Emily says she is trying to give her kids a good balance of both religion from their father and the secular point of view from her. Emily then also shares about some fundraisers for the California Innocence project she has coming up, how she still does case review in her free time when she can, and her main goal of it just bringing awareness to the cause. Where Jen says she has offered her experience as a doctor to volunteer as expert witness if Emily needs her. Emily then gets emotional talking about reconnecting with her father, saying it's actually kind of a catch-22 because she knows now how good of a person he is, and it makes her sad that she missed out on so much of that. And it also makes her even more sad knowing that he watches the show, hearing her talk about how his absence has affected her as an adult. Noella then says Emily was actually her first text after her father passed away, and she's actually urging Emily to continue reaching out to him before it is too late. Emily then ends by sharing next steps of laying everything out on the table with her father in order for her to move forward and have a future with him in her life in some way, shape, or form. I'm really glad they touched on the connection between Noella and Emily as far as their fathers go, because I said a few weeks ago that this is the storyline I want to see them follow more on the show with all the girls, because we saw a few scenes with different girls. Basically, the whole cast this season centered around fathers, whether it's Shannon's good relationship with her father now, or Emily and Noella's estranged relationship, or even Jen's father passing away. Heather, we saw her with her mom, but we didn't really see her with her father. Maybe there's more of that. But I think Terry, that one scene where they were all in Shannon's backyard, Terry's father has a thing. Shannon's boyfriend John has some kind of father issues. Gina has a great family unit. So that is something I think that could connect all of them and really bond them together, especially the new girls and Noella, who is having a tough time fitting in with the group. And that's a really real storyline. We as viewers can connect, and they can connect with us and connect with each other. So stay tuned until the end for more of the Emily storyline, where Kelly Dodd kind of exposed a little bit of the BS storyline related to the law part of things. But we'll get to that a little bit later. Now on to Gina explaining how the extraction came about, where she saw something in her home after they came home from Cabo, some shadow or figure, which led to her actually now believing in spirits that she didn't believe in before. She then is getting emotional, sharing about how proud she is of her and Matt and how things just keep getting better between the two of them. And she reiterates her stance from earlier in the season of her giving the victim impact statement being both necessary for her to move forward and for Matt to take accountability. As you see here, Heather, if you watch the show, she had this very intentional, very exaggerated move to turn towards Gina to really exaggerate and, to me, overcompensate for what she doesn't really care what she's saying, but she was trying to make a point to turn to be like, I'm so interested in what you're saying, even though I think it came off really fake. But anyways, Gina then says her and Travis are not ready to be married since they are both trying to get back on track financially after both going through bad divorces. Plus, they have 6 kids together, all approaching college age in the near future, and there was a lot of rebuilding to do before they walked down the aisle. So on this, according to Kelly Dodd, the real reason Gina and Travis can't get married yet is because Travis is not even legally divorced yet. This is interesting because this could be great ammo for Shannon or Noella against Gina, since a lot of the cast gave Noella flack for having a ceremony before legally marrying James. That was a whole thing of the storylines don't add up between Jen and Emily, and then of course Heather and Gina. So if that is true about Travis, I agree with Kelly on why is this not being talked about if that is the truth. Maybe also the finances are part of it, but why not share the whole truth? I don't agree with Kelly, though, that not showing certain parts of your life should disqualify you from the show. But if you're only showing a certain part of your life, it better be good enough to make up for the parts you're not showing. That's all I'll say. And the final scene of part 1 was the beginning of the conversation about Jealousy Gate, where Gina and Heather are explaining their fast friendship connection of both being New Yorkers and having that in them. First, though, Shannon says it meant a lot for Gina's parents to say thank you to her in person. Shannon then has Gina agreeing with her, saying, yes, I said I would stop bringing up the DUI again. Where Emily then pipes in, much to Shannon's dismay, sarcastically saying, oh, should I apologize a third time? Emily picks up on the tone, but Shannon says she goes above and beyond for people at times, doesn't need friendship to be tit for tat, but also friendship is a two-way street. Now, to me, Shannon, you can't have all 3 things at once and have them all be true. Pick one, stick to a lane, figure it out. But I think that was interesting. She was trying to have all of her cake and eat it too in this case. Then Shannon says, I was going through a divorce when you joined the show, and that's why we weren't close at first. But Gina calls her out, saying, no, you were just being cliquey with Tamara and Vicky, and you weren't letting any of us in with that group. And basically Gina said she wasn't buying that excuse. Gina then says I was going through a lot too, but I was still able to connect with people, where Shannon goes, I don't have the good fortune that you have. I think she was alluding to that she doesn't have shared custody, and which means she doesn't have a lot of time outside the home life, even though her kids are now grown and about to be all in college. So Gina then says, okay, I guess I have the good fortune. Yeah, sure. Okay. So this part 1 ends with Gina and Shannon screaming at each other because Shannon thinks she keeps getting cut off by Gina, who still isn't backing down, saying, you are going to lose your voice because you have a lot of explaining to do, ending with Emily's evil laugh, which I thought was an out of place edit, was a funny way to end this episode. And we're going to have to pick up the whole Jealousy Gate next week, and we'll share some more thoughts on that then. All right, let's now get into finishing my finale thoughts from last time, and then we'll get to more on the after shows from the last 2 weeks. And then, of course, more reunion thoughts and reactions to other people's recaps and whatnot from this episode so far. So first, of course, last week I didn't watch the after show before going live with you all. And it was a bad idea because my suspicion during my last live recap about it being a Halloween party was right, because Heather confirmed that it was a Halloween costume party on the after show of the finale, but that was my fault for waiting too long to put that episode out. But the reason I think it wasn't acknowledged as a Halloween party was because Shannon also in that after show said she doesn't really like the traditional scary, gory Halloween theme. So it wouldn't have really made sense to call it a Halloween party anyway. And I'm sure they don't want us to really know a timeline, even though it was, I figured out that it was October-ish time. And apparently the song idea came together on a Tuesday or Wednesday before the party on the Saturday that they were having this. And I was trying to look to see, because let's see, Halloween was on a Sunday, the 31st, and so I'm guessing they maybe had this party on the 30th, that Saturday. But anyways, it was apparently Shannon recruiting Heather for help regarding the song, not necessarily Heather coming and saving the day from Shannon the way they edited it on the show and the way Heather probably wants us to believe it happened. Also, it was probably a great in for Heather to show off, as I stated last time. So I stand by what I said on all that stuff. But as far as Kelly and Rick and their recap of the finale, they responded to people saying, I guess on Twitter or elsewhere, that they want Kelly back on the show. At the end of next part, this part 2 reunion recap, I will give kind of my final thoughts on casting, what I think for next season, which is what I did last season for Beverly Hills. But Kelly basically says, you know what, with this group, I don't really want to be back. And she basically says her being fired from the show was actually one of the best things to happen to her, and she has a lot of great opportunities coming up. I agree with her, though, that now Bravo is kind of in a pickle, considering Heather's return, from what I see, probably didn't turn out the way they might have hoped, unless they were hoping she would turn into a villain. Maybe Heather wants to stay on the show and she's just going to embrace that role. Who knows? But now, according to Kelly and Rick on Twitter, people have also been turning on Gina, likely because of her involvement with Heather, who is now unlikable. So we'll see what happens in the future. That could be an interesting heel turn for all of them. But they did, however, Kelly and Rick disagree with my take on the Gina and Shannon feud, where they think it's pointless, and I guess a lot of people do. I've shared my thoughts on that last week regarding why I don't mind the Shannon and Gina feud, minus the repetition of some of the arguments. But they did agree with my take on Heather trying too hard. So that might seem like a universal theme at this point. All right, now back to this part of the reunion. So Kelly and Rick gave their fashion takes like Dana Wilkie did, which you can watch those two linked in the description after we're done here. I did agree with them that Shannon and Gina looked the best. Even the last minute look from Shannon looked really good. She looked like basically a Barbie doll, which is really, really cool. And I thought Gina's look was pretty cool and kind of different for her. Kelly then called out Emily for ganging up on Noella in the reunion to keep her job on the show, and also called Emily out on not practicing law for over 4 years, basically calling her a liar about being a lawyer, since I guess she hasn't been practicing since shortly after she joined the show. Once kind of the law part of the story wasn't really a central part of her storyline or needed for her to stay on the show, or was like a perk for her to even get on the show at that point because she's already on. Kelly was trying to say Emily being a copyright research centered attorney is not being a real attorney. I think what Kelly meant was saying that Emily isn't a trial attorney, or an attorney in the traditional sense that most people would think or see are more visible. I think people don't realize how many types of lawyers and how many different fields a licensed attorney with a law degree and bar certified or bar license can be, like in so many different areas, not just a courtroom trial setting with a criminal or civil law or whatever. And although Emily wasn't a trial attorney from what we know, she still knows as a bar certified attorney the basics of law. And if it isn't making sense to her as far as the Noella situation, then there might be some there as far as it not really making sense. Now, Rick and Kelly said they think Dr. Jen should be fired before next season because she is quiet, and that's why I call her just their Jen at times. But I think she is just as involved as Crystal in Beverly Hills was last season, Crystal Kung Minkoff. And Crystal is coming back the season that's just about to start. So I don't think we can compare them directly because Crystal happened to have joined the cast last season when the whole Erica Jane Girardi situation completely blew up and changed the dynamics forever. So it'd be hard to remove any one of those cast members considering what they all went through together, finding out about that. Now, what Rick and Kelly didn't get to cover for their recap, that I do by delaying my recap a few days, is answering their question about wondering how the reunion ratings for this first part compare to the finale of this season, which I said I was going to touch on that this time. The finale that aired last week was the worst rated episode of basically the whole series. So it looks like, though, the ratings for this first part of the reunion did better than most of the episodes at basically the entire second half of the season. And that was without a reunion trailer after last week's episode aired, because it went straight into Watch What Happens Live. So I guess that's a good sign that people are still interested enough to pull the numbers up for the reunion closer to what they were at the beginning of the season. Even though the beginning of the season ratings weren't that great, they were still a drop off from the season before as far as overnight live viewers, if you will. Not the delayed ones that Andy and Bravo want to spin the story on the ratings, being like, oh, the delayed is which matters, blah, 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 whatever. But it also took like Real Housewives of New York City and other franchises a few years and seasons to get back on track after some tweaks to the cast and some hiatus. So this isn't a complete death sentence like the last season of Real Housewives of New York City, which the ratings completely dropped off. And they didn't even get to have a reunion because there was so much turmoil with the cast. Or even the Dallas Housewives, similar thing happened. But we have Miami Housewives who, after many years off the air, came back on Peacock streaming. And now there's talks of the New York City Housewives having two different ones, an OG one and a new one. And then there's talks of probably other housewives that got quote unquote canceled, maybe coming back via streaming. So maybe only community posts and Bravo fan accounts posting the trailer was a smart move on Bravo's part, testing audience loyalty, or could mean people only wanted to watch the reunion and not really invest or care enough to invest time in the rest of the season. Finally, the after show of this reunion episode was more of a wrap up last thoughts of the season with a few notable comments. First, Shannon called BS on Gina's reason for telling Heather about the Nicole James lawsuit, saying it wasn't comparable to what Gina was saying was the reason of her wanting to tell someone what everyone else knew, because she wanted to be told when she found out her husband was cheating. Shannon doesn't think the situations are the same, but Shannon says her situation was similar to Gina's when David's affair was all around and Shannon didn't know. The reason being because no one knew about the lawsuit besides Nicole, Shannon, Gina, and Emily. And from what we saw on the camera, it looked like Terry and Heather didn't even remember the lawsuit until it was brought to them for some reason. I personally would have a hard time forgetting someone sued me, especially given the reaction Heather had to it being unveiled on camera. And if I was getting sued that often, I probably would be keeping a list of people to avoid that have sued me, because why would I want to hang out with someone who's tried to sue me, especially if it was not a good situation. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this reunion part 1 recap and react. Remember, you are the algorithm. Whatever you click, like, follow, subscribe to, comment to, watch is you telling the platform that you are on what you want more of. So with that said, if you liked what you saw here, make sure to do all those things to see more stuff like this, and make sure to join me next time. But until then, tap or click the screen, head to the description, or click around the channel for more related content, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.